Greetings and welcome back. I received a kind of secondhand comment, and of course, I let my ego take it as being a request that I talk a little bit about Passover, which is about to begin in less than 24 hours. It's a fascinating festival, and we all grew up going to Seder's, probably not overly liking them, watching them deteriorate into family arguments, looking ahead in a book, counting the lines until it came to your turn to read because we all went around the table and we all took turns reading. And we would read about Flintstones, and of course I would giggle all the time because I would think of the cartoon show. Or we'd read about different kinds of children or other things that simply had little impact on your life. Is that what it's supposed to be? No. There are times in the year when I spend a lot of time driving. And when I get bored of the Broadway channel, I switch, and lately I've been listening to a great album. And I date myself because I called it an album. And it's by a local band here called Me 3. And unfortunately, it's not available on iTunes yet. But every time I put it on, I keep expecting to hear a lousy song or two or 10. But they're all great. And I think it's the first song on the album, and it's called 10 Little Rules. And it's the story of Moses and the Ten Commandments and how simple and free life is and can be if you just follow those rules. And this festival that we're about to celebrate is all about the Festival of Freedom. And it comes to us from Exodus 12. So I'm going to read a little bit for you. The Lord said to Moses and Aaron in the land of Egypt, "This month shall mark for you the beginning of the months. It shall be the first of the months of the year for you. Speak to the whole community of Israel and say that on the 10th of this month, each of them shall take a lamb to a family, a lamb to a household." And then it talks a little bit about the lamb, and you keep it for 4 days. And then you're told how to eat it. With sandals on your feet and your staff in your hand, and you shall eat it hurriedly. It is a Passover offering to the Lord, right? Because that night God will go through the land of Egypt, striking down the firstborn. And then in Exodus 12:14 it says, "This day shall be to you one of remembrance. You shall celebrate it as a festival to the Lord throughout the ages. You shall celebrate it as an institution for all time. 7 days you shall eat unleavened bread. On the very first day you shall remove leaven from your houses. For whoever eats leavened bread from the first day to the seventh day, that person shall be cut off from Israel." And so basically, those are the instructions. And you're supposed to eat unleavened bread for 7 days. Friends, you're about to celebrate this festival of freedom. It's a time to celebrate freedom and to remember. It says it's supposed to be a remembrance. And it's about to remember the struggle to be free. And the struggle to be free is something man has been going through since his creation in Genesis 1:26, when God says, "Let us make man in our image." From that time on, we have gotten in our own way so that it has become second nature for us to not notice that we're not necessarily free, we are not necessarily happy, and we are not necessarily optimistic. And so we institute days of remembrance. And these days of remembrance force us to evaluate things and realize where we are, who we are, where we were, and perhaps even to look at where we're going. Now, what makes for remembrances and remembrance days? We are told in Exodus to remember Passover for eternity. It's not even a temporary thing. It's, forever. And so we've gathered annually for these many thousand years, and we tell the story of freedom. And this is a happy remembrance that we should be taking joy in celebrating. And there are great opportunities great blessings, like the Baruch HaBanim, the blessing of the children. But we don't have to wait for Passover to bless our children or anyone else in our lives, do we? As my favorite songwriter said, here's another clue for you all. And as I've said many times before, and I'll say it again and again, our hearts are now the altar of the Holy of Holies. And so we have to keep these fires burning within us, the fire of freedom, the fire of peace, the fire for happiness. We do it internally. Is your fire still burning? Has your fire ever gone out? If it has, what put it out? How did you restart it? How would you keep it going? Is it enough to keep it smoldering so that it can be stoked when necessary? Is minor observance of the rules and regulations enough? For everybody it's different, and for everybody these questions are different and the answers are different. They're important questions to ask yourself and those around you. And Passover is a fantastic time to even ask these questions, which are not traditional Passover questions. And I was thinking about these questions, and I thought about the words to the Blue Jays song, I Dreamed Last Night. Well, I dreamed last night you were calling my name. You were locked inside of your secrets, calling my name. And you told me lost was the key. And you told me how you longed to be free. That you don't know how. Oh, let me show you now. How often do we long to be free? I think we all long to be free. How long do we, sit there and think about our freedom that we've lost? And we've all lost freedoms throughout our lives. How often do we simply feel lost? How often are we searching for the key, whatever that key happens to be? And here we are, about to embark on the Festival of Freedom, Passover, the most important holiday in the Torah. True, it is no longer the most important holiday in the religion, but forever it will be the most important holiday in the Torah, and for a very good reason. And for those of you, who don't know, the Blue Jays were an offshoot of the Moody Blues. It was a couple of them who got together, and they only released one album, but it really was a fantastic album. We were told in Exodus 12:17 that we are to observe the festival of unleavened bread, or Passover, to commemorate the day that God brought us out of Egypt. And we are to observe it in each generation, an eternal law. An eternal law, like an eternal flame, like the eternal flame of freedom. We have to observe Passover for eternity. And we're not given a lot of guidance or guidelines in Exodus as to how to observe the festival, other than in some of the food and some of the ritual. And I'll give you a minute to get a pen and paper so that I can write down what the specific rules are so that you can make sure that you observe them. Lamb, unleavened bread. No work day 1, no work day 7. That's it. Those are all of the rules for this festival. There are no others in the Torah. There are many rabbinic rules that we've all been observing in all of our annual rituals of the Seder. So instead, we've been following rabbinic traditions, and we all know how it's developed. We are to tell the story of freedom. But how do you make it meaningful and pertinent to your family and your generation? The goal is to make it pertinent to your generation. And to make it pertinent to your generation, you have to make it personal. What have you done to attain freedom? We all seek freedom in our lives. We all define freedom separately. Don't read from a book. We will annually sit there and we all hand out usually the little yellow and red books. At least in my day it was the little yellow and red books. Don't read from the book. Tell your own story of freedom. Get everybody at the table to give their story of freedom. Talk about what plagues you have had to overcome. Talk about the pharaohs in your life. And encourage everybody at the table to talk about theirs, regardless of what their backgrounds are. And we all know that now we're sitting in a diverse, group of people. It's not just going to be like, the Jews in our family. Our family is now made up of many faiths and many peoples. It's an opportunity to create living history. Be an example for your group and have everybody contribute their experiences. As Bob Dylan said, we got much to talk about and much to reminisce. Oh, it sure is right on a night like this. At the beginning of this story of freedom, we are told that a new king rose in Egypt. One who did not know Joseph. That's the beginning of this whole thing. One who did not know Joseph. There were 5 pharaohs mentioned in the Torah. The one who thought Sarah was Abraham's sister. The one who knew Joseph. The one who did not know Joseph. The one who sought to kill Moses. And the Pharaoh of the Exodus. The last 2 may be the same, we don't know. But none of them are named. Exodus 12:14 says, "And this day shall be to you one of remembrance. You shall celebrate it as a festival to the Lord throughout the ages. You shall celebrate it as an institution for all time." We call this holiday Passover, but in Exodus 12:17 we are told it is the festival of unleavened bread. Is that how you think of it? Unleavened bread, matzah. Many I know think of matzah as an ordeal of the festival, not as the festival. We are told to eat unleavened bread because we left in a hurry and we didn't have time for the bread to rise, and so it is the bread of poverty and affliction. I would say, hey, put your hands up if you didn't grow up learning that story. I can't see you, but I guarantee you've all got your hands up. That's what everybody learned. We left in such a hurry, but we still had to pack 2 sets of dishes, 2 dishwashers, 2 of everything. Sounds a little more like Noah and the ark with 2 of everything. Leavening agents. Leavening agents, what do? They make things rise. And the thing that rises in man is his ego. And his ego can be his greatest sin and his ultimate pharaoh. This is the festival of egoless bread. When we put aside the ego, my friends, we can attain freedom because we put ourselves in a state of faith and we put ourselves out of our own way. This is the festival of unleavened bread. We've changed its name to Passover. It sounds better. It's a better story, about the angel of death. It starts off as God, it becomes the angel of death, but that's a whole other lecture. And I've talked a lot in the past about definitions and how definitions change and how we use words to mean something that they don't necessarily mean. And a perfect example is the word Seder. Seder means order. But of course we take it as the event itself. Hey, I'm going to a Seder, I'm going to a Seder. I'm going to first Seder, second Seder. But in reality, it's simply the order of the event. Friends, this year, make your Seder different. Make it personal. We eat certain foods for a good reason. These were things determined by the rabbis. This was not in the Torah. The Torah, like I said, it's got 2 real simple rules. You eat lamb, and very few people actually eat lamb. Most people eat chicken or fish, but very few people actually eat lamb. You eat lamb, and you eat egoless bread, unleavened bread for 7 days. It is the festival of unleavened bread. It is not Passover. That's simply what we call it. So we eat these certain foods, and we eat them in a certain order, and there's a certain reason, and there's a spiritual reason that the rabbis have added these things for, but you don't usually get a lot of explanation. So I'm going to quickly tell you why we eat some of these things. They've got great spiritual significance, even though they're rabbinic. We have zeroa, which is the roasted shank bone of the lamb. And that's part of our Seder plate. And the lamb is for a couple of very good reasons. It was a god, and so therefore we were eating a god and showing that we were, of course, superior in many ways. It was the timing. We can tell the time of events by the type of animal in the Torah. And in biblical era was the age of Aries in terms of the great ages, and that would be the age of rams, lambs, things like that. The Minoan age would have been the age of the bull. All right, so we can always tell when events took place by the kind of animal. We have beitza, which is the boiled egg. And what's the point in the egg? Well, the egg is about new life, and we all learn about that. The egg has always been the universal symbol of life. We have maror, which is the bitter herbs, which are supposed to remind us of bondage. And I think for the most part we all use horseradish. And some horseradish is a lot worse than other horseradish. And then there's one of my favorite things, that's the haroseth. And that's the mixture that we were told was used in the building of the cities and to make the pyramids. Not. I mean, history, we grew up learning this, but of course, the Israelites were never slaves because there was no slavery at that point in time. There was corvée, forced labor, but there was no slaves per se. And they certainly weren't building the pyramids. But what this actual formula was, and I think most people make it with some apple and some walnut and some other things. There's actually 10 ingredients in ancient formulas for it. And the 10 ingredients represented the 10 items on the tree of life. And it was made up of 3 roots and 7 fruits. And another time I'm more than happy to go through the formula. And when you look at it, you say, okay, why this? Okay, it wasn't the bricks to make pyramids, my friends. The tree of life represents everything that there is from a mystical point of view. And there's one symbol that fits on the tree of life, and it's a modern symbol, and we all recognize that symbol, and it's the sign for Venus, which is the sign of the feminine, the circle with the stick, the cross underneath it. That fits on the tree of life perfectly, and it's the sign of Venus, and it's a sign of love. And so what's that is telling you is that the tree of life is really, it represents one thing only, and that one thing is love. And what we are doing is making the formula that represents the mortar that holds the universe together. It's the universal formula for love. We have karpus, which is the green vegetable, and the green vegetable signifies new beginnings. 2 times in the year, friends, there's major change that occurs, once in the spring, once in the fall. Exodus told us this shall be the first month of the year. And so halfway through the year puts us in, September, because the beginning of the year is now. And so there's 2 times to take stock of yourself, and 2 times in the year in which to get yourself free. And what we do is we celebrate our freedom now, and then 6 months from now, we take stock of who we are, what we've done, what we've become, and we go through Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, which isn't the beginning of the year, because this was the beginning of the year, but it's a time to take stock. So twice during the year we can free ourselves, and I think it's wonderful that we have this incredible opportunity to always be freeing ourselves. So these are the things that I want you to give some thought to going over when you do your Passover Seders, tomorrow and the next day. And perhaps next year, if anybody's interested, I'll put together a much more detailed and involved presentation that goes through an entire Seder, broken down by each of the appropriate sections. And this way you can all have me at your Seder, and you can watch a section, and you could discuss it, and you could make it a part of your regular presentation. and eat, and then you move on and do another section. We could do one on the foods, we could do one on, the story, one on how you make it more personal. And I'll be like Eliyahu, the invisible guest, showing up at everybody's, and I could be like at a gazillion seders and actually not gain a pound. So anyhow, friends, thank you for joining me again, because like I said, I let my ego, and I'm about to enter the festival of egoless bread, convince me that you actually wanted to hear a little bit more. So I hope you enjoy it. I hope it makes you think a little bit differently about the Seder you're about to host or be a guest at, and maybe you can bring up a couple of different topics. Talk about what the pharaohs in your own lives are. For some people it's the mortgage, for some people it's their business, for some people it's just the lives they lead, and they're slaves to life and they don't enjoy themselves. We all make pharaohs. That's why the pharaohs in the Torah are all nameless, right? It's because we create them. And that's why we could make this a permanent thing on an annual basis and bring it into our generation and our life, because we've created, every one of us has created our own pharaohs. And every one of us has let our own egos get in the way. And every one of us has let our fires go out at some point in time. This is the time to take stock of these things. This is the time to examine these things. So when you have your Seder or your order, please feel free to think about some of these things. Make it personal. Bring freedom back into the whole point of Passover. Don't read from the book. Tell your story of freedom and get everybody at your table to tell their story of what imprisoned them and what they had to do to be free. You don't know who you're going to influence by telling how you freed yourself. You may be helping more people than you can possibly imagine. Thank you, friends. Have a wonderful Passover, a fantastic festival of freedom, and I'll see you soon. Take care.